Hey dear beautiful souls, it's another lovely day on Epic Tales by Oma. Thank you for always watching, liking and supporting. Please share this video with your family and friends. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Grab a seat, relax, and let's get into today's amazing African tale. Amaku village was once a place of laughter and bright festivals. But lately, a heavy silence hung over the land. King Ozondu, the great ruler of Amaku, lay on his bed in the royal hut, weak and pale. The villagers whispered that he was gravely ill. The king had fought many battles in his youth and had led his people wisely, but now he was losing a battle that none of his warriors or medicine men could win. The best healers in the kingdom came to the palace. They gave King Ozondu herbs and tonics, but nothing seemed to cure his sickness. His skin was hot with fever some days and cold as night on others. The king's wise eyes, once full of fire, looked dull and distant. Day after day, he grew weaker. People said it was as if an invisible shadow was draining the life out of him. In the mornings, King Ozondu would sit by his window and look at the rising sun. He remembered when he used to join the villagers in the dance field during New Yam festivals. He remembered the drums and the singing of the women, the way his heart would pound with pride and joy as he danced with his people. Now, he could barely stand without help. He would sigh and turn away from the sun, lying back down with sadness weighing on his chest. The elders of Amaku were worried. If the king died without naming a successor, who would lead the village? King Ozondu had no known children or heir, and the thought of the kingdom without a leader frightened everyone. The elders decided to consult the gods. They called for the kingdom's high priest, a man named Dyke, who knew the ancient ways and could speak to the gods of their ancestors. High Priest Dyke performed a sacred ritual on a moonless night. He burned incense and kola nut, and he chanted prayers in the old tongue by the great Iroko tree in the palace courtyard. The villagers gathered at a respectful distance, watching the flames flicker and listening to the crackling of the fire. The night was still and quiet. Even the crickets seemed to hush as the priest closed his eyes to seek guidance. After hours of prayer and meditation, the gods finally spoke through Dyke. When the priest opened his eyes, there was a strange light in them. He summoned the elders and the Queen Mother to hear the message. In a low, trembling voice, Dyke said, "The gods have revealed the cure for the king's illness. Only one thing can heal King Ozondu, or at least prolong his days." The elders leaned in closely. "What did the gods say?" one elder asked with a furrowed brow. All the villagers held their breath as the night wind gently blew, scattering some ashes from the fire. High Priest Dyke took a deep breath and spoke. "Only joy can save King Ozondu. Only laughter and a heart lifted by happiness can give him strength to continue living." The people of Amaku were puzzled by this message. Joy? Laughter? How could joy be given like a medicine? They expected the gods to ask for a rare herb or a difficult sacrifice. Instead, the cure was something that could not be brewed in any pot. King Ozondu himself, listening from his bed inside the hut, felt a stir in his heart. It had been so long since he had truly laughed or felt real joy. His sorrow was deep, known only to him and the gods. Some of the elders suspected that the king's sadness was not caused by illness alone, that it began with the heartbreak or loss many years ago that he kept secret. But Ozondu never spoke of it, and none dared ask. He closed his eyes, remembering times long past when he had been happy. The next morning, King Ozondu called for a meeting with the council of elders despite his weakness. They gathered around his bedside, their faces full of concern. The king's voice was weak but clear as he spoke. "Our ancestors have shown us the path. If joy is what I need, then joy is what I must find." His voice trembled with hope and desperation. He looked at the elders and the few chiefs present and announced, "I will organize a grand gathering. Let the word go out to every corner of Amaku and beyond. Anyone who can make me smile, truly smile with a dance, shall inherit my throne after me." The elders gasped. It was an extraordinary decree. Some exchanged nervous glances. Traditionally, a king's successor was chosen from royal blood or among the chiefs. But King Ozondu had just declared that the next ruler would be the person who could dance and bring joy to his heart. It was unheard of, yet no one dared question the king at that moment, for there was a fire in Ozondu's eyes they had not seen in years. It was a flicker of hope. King Ozondu was carried outside on a wooden throne by two of his loyal guards, so he could watch the performances. He wore a rich velvet robe trimmed with gold, but beneath the fine cloth he looked frail. The king's face was solemn. Dark circles sat under his eyes from nights of pain and sleeplessness. Still, he tried to sit upright, determined to witness every dance. By his side stood High Priest Dyke, a few elders, and the Queen Mother, all watching hopefully. At the king's feet lay a royal drum that would be beaten to announce each performer. A loud drum beat signaled the start of the contest. A crier stepped forward and called out, "Let the dancers come forward one by one. The king, our great Ozondu, will watch. Remember his decree. Whoever can make him smile with their dance shall be the next king or queen of Amaku." The crowd murmured in awe at those words. Many still could hardly believe that even a common person could become their ruler if they succeeded today. King Ozondu was carried outside on a wooden throne by two of his loyal guards, so he could watch the performances. He wore a rich velvet robe trimmed with gold, but beneath the fine cloth he looked frail. The king's face was solemn. Dark circles sat under his eyes from nights of pain and sleeplessness. Still, he tried to sit upright, determined to witness every dance. By his side stood High Priest Dyke, a few elders, and the Queen Mother, all watching hopefully. At the king's feet lay a royal drum that would be beaten to announce each performer. A loud drum beat signaled the start of the contest. A crier stepped forward and called out, "Let the dancers come forward one by one. The king, our great Ozondu, will watch. Remember his decree. Whoever can make him smile with their dance shall be the next king or queen of Amaku." The crowd murmured in awe at those words. Many still could hardly believe that even a common person could become their ruler if they succeeded today. The first to perform was a famed warrior from a faraway clan. His name was Agadike, a giant of a man with muscles like carved wood. He was dressed in leopard skins and carried a spear and shield. As the drums thundered, Agadike began his dance, a fierce war dance that he had performed on battlefields. He stormed and leapt high into the air, brandishing his spear as if fighting an invisible enemy. The crowd cheered at his strength and skill. He spun like a whirlwind and let out a battle cry that echoed off the palace walls. But King Ozondu did not smile. When Agadike finished and bowed deeply, breathing hard, the king nodded in thanks, but his face remained unmoved. The warrior's mighty dance, impressive as it was, could not lift the king's sorrow. Next came a group of three sisters known throughout Amaku for their graceful dance. They wore bells on their ankles and flowed onto the performance ground like water, moving in harmony. Their dance was gentle and beautiful, like butterflies fluttering around a flower. One played a flute while the others twirled in circles. The melody was sweet and their steps were light. The crowd watched in delight at the lovely performance. But the king's face remained serious, as if carved from stone. Not even a flicker of a smile crossed King Ozondu's lips. The sisters finished, bowed shyly, and left with disappointment in their eyes. After them, a well-known chief named Udoka took the stage. He was not a young man, but he was known to dance with the energy of a youth. Chief Udoka wore his ceremonial red cap and eagle feather, symbols of his title. He danced a playful dance, imitating the movements of various animals to amuse the king. At one moment, he hopped like a sparrow. At another, he stomped like an elephant. The children in the audience giggled at the chief's humorous dance. Even some elders chuckled quietly. But King Ozondu only watched politely. His lips did not curl into a smile. Udoka ended his dance by shaking his walking stick playfully and doing a little hop. He bowed, and the crowd clapped, but the king gave only a weary nod. One performer followed another. A famous royal dancer from the king's own court, a woman named Chinyere, performed next. She danced elegantly, balancing a clay pot on her head while swaying to the drums. Everyone applauded her skill when she did not drop the pot even once. But the king's face was still, showing no change. Chinyere left the stage with tears in her eyes, for she had hoped her beloved king would at least grin at her art. Then came a young acrobat, Ikenna, who could flip and somersault like no other. He turned cartwheels and even walked on his hands, making the crowd roar with applause. Yet even upside down, he could not turn the king's frown upside down into a smile. King Ozondu watched carefully, but he was still and unsmiling. With each performance, the hope in the crowd's hearts fluttered and then fell. They began to realize how hard it was to make the sorrowful king even crack a smile. Warriors, titled chiefs, drummers, and dancers from all corners of the land took their turn. They beat their drums, leapt into the air, and spun like the wind. Yet the king remained unmoved, his face heavy with years of sorrow and secrets. As the midday sun shone overhead, the enthusiasm in the crowd started to wane. People murmured to each other in worry. "Will anything make the king happy again?" one villager whispered. "Perhaps his sadness is stronger than any dance," another replied, shaking his head. After many performances, the palace courtyard grew quiet. The drums stopped for a moment, and all that could be heard was the whisper of the breeze and the shuffling of feet. A few villagers began to lose hope and drift away from the front of the crowd, believing that no one could accomplish this impossible task. Even High Priest Dyke looked troubled, wondering if the god's message had been understood correctly. King Ozondu himself felt a heaviness in his chest. He was touched by the efforts of his people, but none of the dances had reached the locked-away corners of his heart where a small seed of joy might grow. It truly seemed that the contest was over. High Priest Dyke sighed and stepped forward, preparing to speak. A few elders were already shaking their heads sadly, and some villagers started to gather their things to leave, accepting that no one could make the king smile. Even King Ozondu started to think that perhaps no one could find that key to make him smile again. Just as despair began to settle, a strange sound echoed through the palace gates. Thump, scratch, thump, scratch. It was the sound of something dragging along the ground. The crowd turned to look toward the gate. The guards stepped aside in confusion as a figure crawled forward into the courtyard. Gasps and murmurs rose from the people. It was a beggar, a man with no legs, moving slowly, using his hands and arms. The beggar's name was Lotana. His clothes were dusty and torn, and his skin bore scars from a hard life. He had only a worn mat tied around the stumps of his legs. With each pull of his arms, he dragged himself forward, creating that scraping sound on the earth. Some people in the crowd started to laugh and jeer. They could not believe that a legless beggar would dare come to the king's great contest of dancers. "Go back!" a young man in the crowd yelled. "This is no place for the likes of you!" Others muttered in agreement. One woman shook her head pityingly. "Oh, what a shame, the poor man!" A stout guard frowned and moved to block Lotana's path. "Be gone, beggar," the guard said sternly. "Do not make a mockery of this contest. How can you dance for the king? You have no legs to stand on." The guard's words were harsh, and some in the crowd chuckled cruelly. But Lotana did not back away. Planting his calloused hands firmly on the ground, he lifted his upper body and spoke in a clear, calm voice. "Your Majesty, King Ozondu," he said, his eyes shining with determination. I may have no legs, but I have a dance. With your permission, great king, I wish to dance for you." His request was humble yet bold. The crowd fell into an uneasy silence. Many could not believe what they were hearing. A beggar with no legs wanted to dance for the king? It sounded like a foolish dream. Some bystanders started to mock him openly. One lanky fisherman laughed and shouted, "When the moon shines, even the cripple is hungry to walk." A ripple of laughter passed through a section of the crowd at those words, as a few found it funny that this man thought he could succeed where strong warriors and trained dancers had failed. King Ozondu raised his hand slightly, and the murmurs and laughter died down. The king's eyes, which had been dull with despair moments before, now showed a spark of interest. There was pity in them, but also curiosity. He had heard Lotana's clear voice. The king spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Let him dance." The chief guard hesitated, looking at the king and then at the beggar on the ground. "Your Majesty, he is just a crippled beggar." The guard started to protest in a low voice, but King Ozondu shook his head. "Have we not invited all to try? Let him dance." The king's decree was absolute. The guard stepped back respectfully, and the crowd watched with wide eyes. Lotana bowed his head gratefully toward King Ozondu. Then he moved into the center of the open space that all the other dancers had used. The onlookers formed a circle around him, where others had stood tall on 2 feet. Lotana remained low to the ground, but he held himself with quiet dignity. A hush fell over the courtyard. Even the wind seemed to pause, and the air felt charged with anticipation. For a moment, Lotana closed his eyes. He placed his hands on the earth beneath him. The ground was warm from the midday sun. He breathed deeply, and then he began. With only his arms and the strength of his spirit, Lotana started to dance. He pushed his body up with his powerful arms and swayed to a rhythm that only he could hear at first. His movements were unlike any dance seen before. He used his hands to spin himself around on the dusty ground. His torso twisted and turned gracefully. It was as if an invisible force was guiding him. The bells on the anklets left behind by the previous dancers jingled softly as he passed over them, adding a faint music to his movements. The crowd watched in astonishment. What began with snickers turned into awed silence. Lotana moved his body in ways that no one imagined possible for a man with no legs. He lifted himself and swung, making sweeping patterns in the dust. Each time he swung his body, his arms caught him and pushed him into another smooth motion. There was a fluid grace to his dance that hushed even the birds on the rooftops. As Lotana danced, a gentle drumbeat started. High Priest Dyke, sensing something special, motioned to the royal drummers to give a soft rhythm. The drummers, who had been resting, picked up their instruments quietly. They began to beat a slow, steady rhythm on the ojin metal gong, and a drum matching Lotana's movements. Boom, boom, boom went the drum like a heartbeat. The rhythm was calm and deep, and Lotana danced as if he were part of the earth itself, rising and falling like a feather in the breeze. Every twist of Lotana's body, every beat of the drum seemed to awaken a buried memory in King Ozondu's heart. As the king watched, his stern face began to change. In Lotana's dance, there was something familiar. A pattern of movement or a feeling that tugged at Ozondu's soul. The king leaned forward slightly on his throne, eyes fixed on the beggar. Lotana then began to hum a tune as he danced. It was low at first, then louder and clearer. The melody floated in the air, haunting and beautiful. King Ozondu's eyes widened. He recognized that song. It was a lullaby, one that he had sung long ago under the moonlight, in the arms of a woman he once loved more than anything in the world. The king's heart pounded. Memories he had buried deep now rushed forth. He saw in his mind the image of a younger himself, laughing with a beautiful woman by the riverbank, singing that lullaby together as they dreamed of a future. He remembered her smile, her voice as she whispered the words of that very song. He remembered the day he last saw her, tears in her eyes as she turned away from him and vanished into the night beyond the palace gates. King Ozondu's eyes filled with tears at these memories, long locked away. King Ozondu could not hold back his emotions. A tear rolled down his cheek, then another. His shoulders began to shake as years of sorrow and longing poured out of him. And then, as Latana spun slowly and came to a gentle stop, the unthinkable happened. King Ozondu smiled. It was a small smile at first, quivering on his lips, as if he had almost forgotten how. Then it grew, bright and true, like the sun breaking through dark clouds. The king was smiling and crying at the same time, his face lifted in wonder and relief. For a heartbeat, the entire courtyard was silent as the people registered what they were seeing. Then a sudden cheer erupted from the crowd. "The king smiles! The king smiles!" someone shouted joyfully. Others laughed in astonishment and clapped. Many had tears in their own eyes, moved by the depth of emotion in this moment. High Priest Dyke raised his hands to the sky in thanks. The drummers, overcome with excitement, began to beat fast, celebratory rhythms. The whole palace seemed to wake up from a long gloom. King Ozondu slowly stood up from his throne, using his cane for support. His legs were weak, but he found strength in that moment. He stepped forward, tears still shining on his cheeks and a broad smile on his face. He looked at Lotana, who stayed on the ground, breathing hard from his dance, eyes full of hope and uncertainty. The king's voice was gentle as he addressed the dancer. "Young man, that song, where did you learn it? Who are you?" Latana remained where he was, breathing heavily from the effort of his dance and the weight of the moment. He looked up at King Ozondu with tears in his eyes. The king's question hung in the air. "Who are you?" The crowd leaned in, eager and anxious to hear the beggar's answer. At first, Lotana almost couldn't speak. He had waited his whole life for this moment, and now the words caught in his throat. He took a trembling breath. "My name," he began softly, "is Latana." He said it clearly this time, so that all could hear. Many people in the crowd murmured the name to themselves, Lotana. King Ozondu's face twitched at the name, as if it rang a distant bell in his mind. "Lotana," the king repeated under his breath. In the Igbo tongue, everyone knew. The name meant, "Remember the father." A hush fell as understanding began to dawn in the king's eyes. Lotana continued, now finding strength in his voice. "I am the son of a woman named Nwaneka, the woman you once loved." At those words, a thunderstruck silence fell over the courtyard. King Ozondu brought a hand to his mouth, his eyes widening in shock and hope. Nwaneka, that was the name of the forbidden love he had lost so many years ago. The queen mother gasped and steadied herself on her cane, and the elders glanced at one another with faces full of guilt and surprise. "My mother, Nwaneka, told me who my father was," Lotana said, his voice growing steadier. "She told me how the council of elders forbade your love and made you send her away. She said you never wanted to let us go, but you had to for the sake of the kingdom's laws. She raised me in secret, far from here, but she raised me to know who I am. She named me Lotana so that I would always remember my father, even though I never knew you." King Ozondu felt tears streaming down his face again. His hands were shaking. "Nwaneka, my Nwaneka," he whispered, voice choked. Memories of a beautiful, strong-willed young woman flooded back. Nwaneka, whose laughter was like a flowing river, whose dance had once stolen the young prince Ozondu's heart under the moonlight in their youth. She had been by his side before he became king, until the elders discovered she was an Osu, an outcast by the old traditions, and demanded that the relationship end. They told him a king could not marry an Osu, that it would bring ruin to the kingdom. In those days, Ozondu was a new king and felt he had no choice but to obey the council to keep peace. With great sorrow, he let Nwaneka go, never knowing that she was carrying his child. The crowd listened in astonishment as this tale unfolded. Many had not known that their king ever had a forbidden love or a child. Some older villagers remembered whispers of it, but it had been kept secret by the palace. Now the truth was spilling into the light like a long-held storm finally breaking. Lotana wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and continued speaking to the king. "Mother passed away 2 years ago," he said sadly. King Ozondu closed his eyes in pain at hearing this. "But before she died, she made me promise to find you, to see you at least once. She taught me the lullaby that you sang to her. She said it was the key to your heart." At this, the king let out a gentle sob and nodded. The lullaby had indeed unlocked his heart. Lotana reached into the neck of his tattered shirt and pulled out a small object hanging on a cord. It was a carved wooden pendant in the shape of a half moon and sun joined together. He held it up with trembling fingers. "She gave me this," he said. The queen mother, peering from beside the king, exclaimed, "Ozondu, that pendant, it was yours." King Ozondu recognized it at once. It was a love gift he had given Nwanaka in secret, a symbol of the sun and moon which they often swore by in their promises to each other. The king gently took the pendant in his hand, as if to confirm it was real. There was no denying it now. The beggar who had danced so beautifully was indeed his own blood, his son. At that moment, one of the oldest elders, Ojiego, the same elder who had questioned the king's decree, stepped forward from the side. He removed his red cap in respect and knelt on the ground, bowing his head. "Your Majesty," Ojiego said, his voice trembling with remorse, "forgive us. Years ago, we thought we were protecting Amaku's traditions by making you turn Nwanaka away. We never knew such a fate would come of it. We never knew about the child. We were wrong to have caused you such sorrow." Another elder, eyes filled with tears, also knelt and said, "We ask forgiveness from you and from the gods. We see now that the gods have a plan greater than our old laws. This day, the truth has come out." The other council members followed, lowering themselves to their knees in penance. It was a remarkable sight. The highest elders of the land bowing to a beggar, acknowledging their mistake. King Ozondu looked at the elders and shook his head gently. "I am also to blame," he said hoarsely. "I was a king, but I did not have the courage then to defy you. I let my own fear separate me from my own flesh and blood. I have lived in regret every day since." He then turned to Latana, who had remained on the ground. The king carefully knelt down as well, ignoring the creaking pain in his old knees. Now king and beggar were face to face at equal height. Ozondu reached out and embraced Lotana tightly. Father and son held each other and wept. One wept for the lost years and the other for the found future. "My son," King Ozondu said softly, cradling Lotana's head against his shoulder, "please forgive me. I never stopped thinking of your mother. Can you ever forgive me for not being there for you?" Lotana clung to his father, tears of joy and sorrow mingling on his face. "I forgive you, father," he whispered, the word father sweet and strange on his tongue. It was the first time in his life he had ever spoken that word to the man before him. "Mother forgave you too. She always loved you. We both have always loved you from afar." At these words, King Ozondu felt a warm peace wash over him. The burden of guilt and sadness that had weighed on his heart for so many years was finally beginning to lift. At last, King Ozondu slowly stood up, still holding on to Lotana. The crowd watched with bated breath. The old king, his face now alive with joy, raised one hand to silence the murmurs of the crowd. "People of Amaku," he announced, his voice stronger than before, "behold my son, behold Lotana, who has brought laughter back into my heart and light back into this kingdom." There was a stunned pause, and then the villagers and nobles alike erupted in cheers. They had seen the miracle with their own eyes. The king had smiled and now stood revitalized by happiness. Many shouted in approval. Some who had mocked the beggar now bowed their heads in shame, while others simply cried out Lotana's name in celebration. "Lotana! Lotana! Long live the prince!" Voices rose joyously from the crowd. High Priest Dyke stepped forward, raising his arms. When the crowd quieted, he proclaimed, "The gods sent us a message that only joy could save our king. And today, joy came in the form of this young man, Lotana. This is surely the will of the gods." The people cheered again at the priest's affirmation that this outcome was blessed. One of the elders, still kneeling, called out with emotion, "It is said that a child who washes his hands well will eat with the elders. Indeed, Lotana has washed his hands in patience and courage, and today he dines with kings." The other elders nodded and began to sing a traditional song of praise, acknowledging Lotana's rightful place. The proverb resonated with everyone. A boy once cast aside had proven himself worthy of the highest honor. King Ozondu removed the heavy royal necklace from around his own neck. It was a chain of brass and coral beads, a symbol of authority passed down through generations. With gentle hands, he placed it over Lotana's neck. The king also took off his velvet robe and draped it over Lotana's shoulders. It was far too large and long for the young man who still sat low to the ground with no legs. But at that sight, the humble beggar now wearing the king's robe and necklace, the crowd roared in approval and joy. Many beat their drums and began to dance right there, celebrating a day of impossible wonders. Lotana was overcome with emotion. Just that morning, he had been a lonely beggar crawling on the road, and now he was being embraced as a prince and future king. He looked around at the people of Amaku. Faces that had at first shown scorn now shone with admiration and gratitude. Tears of happiness filled Lotana's eyes, but he also smiled brighter than he ever had in his life. King Ozondu, still standing beside his son, raised his hands once more and declared in a loud, clear voice, "Hear me, all of Amaku. By my word and by the will of the gods, Lotana is my son and heir. He shall be your next king." The crowd responded with a thunderous shout of approval that echoed beyond the palace walls. "Long live King Ozondu! Long live Prince Lotana!" The sound was so loud and full of happiness that birds took flight from the nearby trees, and the earth itself seemed to tremble with delight. In that moment, King Ozondu knew that the god's prophecy had come true. Joy had not only prolonged his life, it had given him a reason to truly live again. Surrounded by his people, with his son by his side, the king felt lighter than air. His illness did not vanish in an instant like magic, but everyone could see a change in him. In the days that followed, King Ozondu's health improved steadily as his heart was no longer weighed down by sorrow. Many evenings after that miraculous day, the king would sit with Lotana in the courtyard. He taught his son the history and duties of being a ruler, while Lotana, in turn, filled the king's days with laughter and music. The people of Amaku also embraced their new prince. Inspired by his strength of spirit and kindness, they no longer saw his missing legs as a weakness. Instead, they saw a man who had overcome great hardship and who carried a heart full of music and compassion. And so the story of Lotana spread far and wide. How a legless beggar from the streets turned out to be a hidden prince. How his dance touched the soul of a sorrowful king and saved a kingdom from despair. It became a legend told around village fires at night, passed from one generation to the next. Parents would tell their children about the king who sought joy, and the son who returned in rags to bring that joy. The tale always ends the same way, with a message that echoes through time. The throne of Amaku went not to the strongest warrior or the richest chief, but to the one whose dance touched the soul of a king. Lotana, the son no one wanted, but the one whom the kingdom would never forget. The moral lesson of this story is that true greatness is not measured by strength, wealth, or status, but by the courage of the heart and the power of the spirit. Lotana, though rejected and seen as worthless, proved that determination, humility, and love can break barriers and even heal the deepest sorrows. King Ozondu's joy came not from mighty warriors or rich chiefs, but from the pure dance of a forgotten son. This teaches us that every person has value, and sometimes the least expected can carry the greatest light. It reminds us that joy, truth, and forgiveness are stronger than tradition, pride, or power. Thank you so much for watching. Your love and support mean everything to me. If this story inspired you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your loved ones to spread the inspiration. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more interesting African stories. See you in the next video. Bye!